Minnesota Vikings are a quarterback away. The Minnesota Vikings are a quarterback away. They were a quarterback and a whole hell of a lot more away in 2018. Yikesy, yikesies. Whew. For a team coming off of an NFC Championship game appearance in the 2017 season, selling the bill of goods at getting rid of Case Keenum and giving Kirk Cousins $84 million guaranteed to come in and be the starter the next 3 years was going to be an upgrade. It was going to be the straw that stirs the drink in a different direction. It's going to be the move that puts them over the top. And all that crap didn't happen. It just goes to show you that no two seasons are exactly alike. And just because one season finished a certain way in no way, shape, or form is an indication that the next season, even if you in theory solved one of your biggest deficiencies and got better there, is going to make a whole lot of difference. I'm not that surprised with how the Vikings finished out in 2018. I was on it before the season. I thought the Bears were going to win the division. I didn't think the Vikings had it, as I was concerned that with giving big money to Kirk Cousins like they were going to, and they ultimately did, my concern was that they were going to try and justify that too much. They were going to try and throw too much, put Cousins kind of in an uncomfortable spot behind an offensive line that's not great, and with a running game that they weren't that committed to. And that's kind of what happened. Defense took a small step back, not a significant step back, but a small enough step back. And I think, honestly, you look at Week 17 of the Viking season, that last game at home against the Bears, they have no business losing that game. And Kirk Cousins and that entire Vikings team went out there and just laid another freaking egg. And I see a lot of people are getting really up on the Vikings' chances this year and really getting excited about them, really buzzing about them. And I just wonder what's going to be so much different in 2019 compared to 2018, where the result is going to be a whole lot different. Because honestly, right now, I just don't see it. I liked what they did in the draft, adding Garrett Bradbury in the first round. You needed more help on the interior of that offensive line, and they got it. I like the pick of Irv Smith Jr. in round 2, the tight end. He's a guy that can bring a little something different to the table, a little more explosive element as a receiver than what a Kyle Rudolph can do. You could utilize more 2 tight end alignments now that you've brought Smith into the fold. Alexander Madison, the running back from Boise State, I think is a perfect complement type of back to Dalvin Cook, ensuring that with Dalvin Cook's history of having trouble staying healthy, that you can maximize when you utilize Dalvin Cook for maximum production and efficiency. Looking at this Vikings team, what do I really like about them? I love some of their skill players. I mean, obviously, Adam Thielen, Stephon Diggs, one of the truly best 1-2 combinations at wide receiver in the National Football League, if not the best. Like, these guys are incredibly, ridiculously good. They are just so damn good. And when Dalvin Cook is healthy, he is a freak. He is a difference maker. He is a top-level type of running back talent in the league. And to me, there's no question about that. It's the challenge of him being able to stay healthy. But if you've got all 3 of those guys on the field and you've got them healthy, there is no excuse for Kirk Cousins not to be able to have a big year, because he's going to have guys around him that can really help him produce. Then on the defensive side of the ball, I look at what they've got in Danielle Hunter and Everson Griffin. Hopefully Griffin will be there all season for the Vikings. But looking at them as a combination coming off of the edge, you've got a couple of edge rushers that you've got to worry about when you're playing the Vikings. And, you talk about being able to get to opposing quarterbacks being a big key to success in the NFL. The Vikings have the ability to do that. Now, what concerns me about this team are a couple of key things. Number one, the offensive line. I think you're still starting Riley Reef at left tackle. Is that a formula for success for anyone? Just because you change names, just because you change faces and put them in new places doesn't automatically mean that they're going to be at the level that you need. So while their offensive line was markedly better in 2018 compared to 2017, they still had some ways to go, in my opinion. Then I look at this team and their commitment to the running game. One of the concerns with bringing in a Kirk Cousins and paying him all that guaranteed money was that you're trying to justify the signing by putting more on his plate than necessarily was required. You weren't necessarily paying Kirk Cousins, in my opinion, to be an elite guy. You were paying him to be a better guy than Case Keenum and make some big throws in some key situations, which when you're talking about Kirk Cousins, it can be kind of hit or miss in that category. But last year, you looked at him, I didn't see enough of a consistent commitment to the running game, wanting to throw too much with Kirk Cousins, kind of showcasing him too much, and that's got to change. That's got to change if this team wants to contend with Chicago in the NFC North. And then I look at Kirk Cousins himself. You're 1 year into that 3-year contract you signed with the Vikings. They gave you a crap ton of money. And while you put up numbers last year, what did it ultimately mean? When the team really needed you most, you laid a flat-out stinking egg. Period. It's time for Kirk Cousins to live up to the contract, live up to the commitment. Because if he doesn't, things are going to get ugly in Minnesota pretty quickly. Really quickly. Looking ahead to this team's schedule for this upcoming season, I look at this in kind of pockets here. In the first 6 weeks, they've got 3 divisional games that are all on the road. Week 2 against Green Bay, Week 4 against Chicago, Week 6 against Detroit. If the Minnesota Vikings have playoff aspirations, and more importantly, if they have aspirations for trying to win this division and being a real force in the NFC, then out of those first 3 road divisional games, they must win 2 of them. If that's Green Bay and Detroit, or it's Chicago and Detroit, or Chicago and Green Bay, whatever the case might be, if the Vikings want to be serious this year and they want to play with the big boys, you have to take care of business in your division. Because if you lose 2 of those 3 road games in the division, that puts pressure on you to have to win all 3 divisional games at home in weeks 14 to 17. That leaves a lot to risk because there aren't very many teams that are going to sit there and win a division going 3-3 within the division. You have to usually at least go 4-2. Ideally, you'd like to go 5-1 or 6-0. So for the Vikings, they need to strike early, hurt some of their divisional rivals, and make sure they get off on a good foot in the division. Now we'll look at week 8 and 9. It's another tough gamut there. A lot of road games early on in the year for this team. Week 8, they got to go to Kansas City and follow all that up the next week, going to Dallas. The early schedule is not the most kind to the Vikings, specifically when it comes to the road games and who they have to play on the road. But if the Vikings can hang on and they can get through the first 3 quarters of the season, the last 4 weeks set up relatively favorably for them. Week 14, they've got Detroit at home, the first of 3 divisional games in 4 weeks to close out the season at home. At week 15, they've got to go to the Chargers in LA. But then the last 2 weeks, they got Green Bay at home and they got Chicago at home. Again, the Vikings are in the mix there in this divisional race at the end of the season going into December. They have a chance to really kind of control their own destiny by saying the NFC North has to come through Minneapolis. It has to come through our stadium because we've got those last 3 divisional games all at home to close out the year. The reality is, though, I'm just not high enough on the Vikings this year where I think that they're going to ultimately put the fear of God in the Chicago Bears. I'm just not. I think the Vikings, at their best aspirations, which is fitting considering Kirk Cousins is their quarterback, is a 9-7-ish type of team that's trying to backdoor themselves into the playoffs as a 6th seed in the wild card chase. That's what I look at them as. It's who the Redskins were for a couple of seasons with Kirk Cousins. That's what the Vikings were last year with Kirk Cousins. And that's basically what the hell he is at this point in time to me. I look at this defense, I wonder at some point in time if they're going to take a little bit of a step back. Like they took a small step back from 2017 to 2018. If they take another small step back from 2018 to 2019, it puts even more pressure on Kirk Cousins in that offense, and that's where you can get into trouble. And then if you have an unfortunate injury to a Dalvin Cook or an unfortunate injury to either Stephon Diggs or Adam Thielen, is there really the depth behind them to replace that marquee level production? I just don't think there is. I think the Minnesota Vikings are a solid team. I think the Minnesota Vikings are a good team. I do not think the Minnesota Vikings have championship level upside. I do not think they are a true real deal contender. They are not a great team. They're just a good team, a little above average, which puts them in the back door of the wild card chase, puts them in the back door of the playoffs potentially as the 6th seed, still looking up at my Chicago Bears.